Hello and welcome back. Let's talk some books. This is going to be a quick weekly reading wrap up because my computer storage is almost full. So it means it's going to cut off whenever it decides to, not when I'm actually done. So I did not finish any books yet this week. However, I will probably finish two books today. So let's talk about the two books that I'm currently in the middle of. The first one that I'm going to talk about is Drood by Dan Simmons. Yes, I finally picked this book up. I'm finally reading it. It's on my 10 before the end. It's on my Drood project. I think it was one of my most anticipated reads of this year, one of the books that I wanted to read before the end of the year. It's all the things, all in this one book. And what is this book about? I don't feel like I've actually talked about that in a while. This book is about the last years of Charles Dickens' life. It's a fictional story as narrated by Wilkie Collins, Charles Dickens' longtime competitor, friend, all of the above. And it is a horror story that has an amazing, creepy, atmospheric setting going on where you are set in Victorian London, both above and below, and follows the course of events that most of which happen during Charles Dickens' life after a horrible train accident that he's in. This book is a book for those who like Charles Dickens and Wilkie Collins, or maybe both, and have read quite a few of their novels, like maybe most of their major works, because all of them are talked about in here, some of them to great spoiler extent. But I am excited to be making my way through this book. I am currently on page 680 of 774. I am going to finish this today. That is my goal. And I've been enjoying this book. It covers quite a bit of both of these authors' lives, as well as, like I said, their literary works, but it does it in such a unique fashion. It really gets you to think about the time that they live in, the pros and the cons of each, as well as exploring just what it was like to be an author at that time. And it helps you to recognize like all the contemporaries that they had. Thackeray comes up quite a bit, even though he's not actually in the book itself. It has a very interesting gothic vibe and a weird tale going on in the background that's definitely fictionalized, and it also has just enough gore and intrigue to keep you going. I think the low for me regarding this book is you definitely have to be ready for a whole bunch of Victorian male chauvinism. Now, I have definitely had some people comment, no, that might just be Dan Simmons. But if you look into the history of Charles Dickens and Wilkie Collins, you may or may not find that they are not necessarily the most likable characters. And that does come up in this book, both in the way that they are characterized, but also by some of the side comments that are made by Wilkie Collins about Charles Dickens and some of the insights that we as readers get about Wilkie Collins. So it is kind of interesting. If you don't want your thoughts about either of these authors to maybe be a bit like tarnished, you might not want to pick up this book. But if you have read quite a few of their works, and I've talked multiple times about, yeah, pretty much all of them, then you might not want to read this book. However, if you've enjoyed their work and want a bit of a fictionalized history of their inner workings together, set on the backdrop of a very gothic horror story, then this is the book for you. The second book that I am also almost done with is The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay. And have I read both these chunky books in entirety in 1 week? No. Drood, I had already been 200 pages in, and I was able to just pick up where I had left off earlier this summer. The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay, I'm actually listening to as an audiobook. However, it wasn't until I was 2 hours into the audiobook that I realized my audiobook was abridged. I did need to figure out how I wanted to handle that, and I just decided to just go ahead and continue with the audiobook. I am going to see the opera of this in a couple of weeks, and I just decided that the main point of my reading this book right now, which is a reread for me, is just to remind myself of major plot points of the story and kind of what happened so that I can discuss it with some friends before we go see the opera. And I realized, at least for that purpose, the abridged audiobook was going to do it for me. Even though that was not my intended nor preferred method to listen to this book, I did have enough time to listen to the entire audiobook, but I realized 2 hours into the abridged version got me more than a third of the way through the story. And so I just decided it was going to be too confusing to go back to the beginning and have all the gaps filled in. That said, that brings me to the downside of my abridged audiobook, which is I'm definitely feeling like there's a lot of gaps in the story. Like, events will happen and I'll be like, oh, okay, time has passed and what is going on? And there's just not quite enough explanation. And I'm really not sure why this story was even abridged. I don't feel like it was necessary. And if you don't know, because I haven't mentioned it, what The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay is about, it tells the story of two cousins who are growing up in New York City. And these cousins experience sort of a rags to riches life in the midst of the golden age of comic books. They find themselves as storyteller and illustrator, finding their niche and working their way up the food chain, if you will, while also being surrounded by the heroes and demons of the time, including everything that is going on with World War II. And it is, in its own way, an adventure story and is kind of a story within a story. So you have both the adventure of these cousins trying to, make a living and, discover wealth, from being poor in Brooklyn, as well as the adventure story of the escapist, who is this superhero figure that they create that is fighting off the Nazis and trying to free the world and all its captives. And it is a really interesting, very well told story. The writing is brilliant. But like I said, I'm just not experiencing it to the same extent that I did the first time I read the book because of the abridged version, which is totally my fault. I did see that there were two different audiobooks that I could choose from, but I really need them to like blast it on the cover of the audiobook that it's abridged. And that was not the case here. So oh well, that's what I get for not triple checking, I guess. And so that's it for now. Sorry this is so super fast, but I don't mind a short video, and hopefully you don't either. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye. Hello and welcome back. Let's talk some books. This is going to be a very quickly week of this is going to be